Okay, here we go. Hello and welcome to SIG API Machinery for Kubernetes bi-weekly meeting. My name is Federico Bongiovanni. Today is April 17th, 2024. We are in Q2, if you can believe it. Very good. We have a loaded agenda today. We were just discussing that, so we are going to get straight into it. And we're going to start with the second topic, that is from Todd, if that is okay.
Yeah, so I guess I have a PR that has a fix for when an external name is used with an API service. Currently, there's a requirement to have the cert for the external service match an internal Kubernetes hostname. So this fix attempts to address that by allowing you to specify an interface that, or implement an interface that allows you to resolve the host name of the external service. There was some discussion about not breaking existing behavior, so there's currently a fallback added. If for some reason that external name isn't available, it'll fall back to the original approach that currently exists. Yeah, so just looking for more feedback on the approach, and if there's anything anyone else notices that would block merging this.
So I'm in favor of the change in principle, right? It seems almost like a bug fix, but I saw that Jordan had some questions about whether this allowed control of which egress configuration is being used. And I could see that being important. Was that directly addressed and answered?
Yeah, from my understanding of what was asked, it only applies to one of the two modes, because external names are currently excluded in, I think, the endpoint resolver. So I believe that mode is not relevant currently. But then someone else asked a similar question, like, should it be implemented for the endpoint resolver? But I'm not sure about that.
Okay. I will try to find time to also make a pass sometime in the next week. If I don't get to it, would you mind sending me a Slack message to reminding me?
Sounds great. Thank you.
I was gonna ask, so David, do you have thoughts on, so I had asked in this PR to make it the same. Like basically it's super weird to me that an API service will behave dramatically different based on an opaque API server flag.
Right. You mean the behavior of using egress configuration or not using egress configuration?
Well, maybe like what I'm more referring to is like if you enable aggregator routing or not, like either this will work or it won't work. But like most users don't get to set that flag, right? So like you would want it to work. And I don't know why it couldn't be made to work correctly for both states.
I would have to go back and look at the code. I don't know offhand where and how we make the decision about which egress configuration to use, because when you do not use aggregator routing, you go down a very different path for resolution, right? It becomes like a DNS resolution thing.
Right.
I think that might have been what I was addressing earlier, is that the resolve endpoint function specifically excludes currently external names. It'll error, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, so I get that it doesn't work today, but we're like fixing it in one place to like behave like reasonably correctly with how like TLS verification works. But like, I don't know, API services are supposed to be reasonably portable across environments, right? If I should be able to kubectl apply my API server on different clusters and it work.
I am trying to decide now whether I regret the past choice of doing anything other than enable aggregator routing equals true.
I'm not sure I follow what you say. Are you saying that you regret ever making it possible to disable aggregator routing, like just complete ownership of how it's always done?
Yeah.
I mean, sure. I think basically everyone I know turns it on, other than like a few handful that I still end up caring about. So it's like weird. I can't remember off the top of my head if it's on in AKS.
So I don't think I would. I don't know that I would want it fixed, I guess
I mean, if you think in the other way it's not appropriate, then why is it appropriate in this way?
Because it seems like it should work and it doesn't, right? So like I look at this one and say, like, you can go use this thing, only it doesn't actually work. That represents a problem. Versus, yeah, you just can't use this thing. In which case, does it work or not becomes irrelevant.
I mean, but that's still weird from like an API perspective, right? Like, I, as the consumer, like cluster admin of the REST API, can't make the flag flip, right? But I should reasonably have a functioning API service, I think.
I guess if I were going to make it consistent, I think the direction I would make it consistent in is to disable or deprecate and remove the ability to disable aggregator routing. And so the choice of whether that is a better outcome or not, I don't know that I'm convinced of.
So in the absence of that, it would mean that basically these configs aren't guaranteed to be portable.
They are not guaranteed to be portable, but they are not any less portable than they are today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I would make external name work with aggregator routing, because part of the point of that was to say we resolve the endpoints, and if we can't, then we just don't handle them.
Am I remembering correctly? So when aggregator routing is enabled, this does not work.
Correct. Because at that point, the aggregator is not able to determine the destination. And so aggregator routing is used to determine the IP that'll be contacted.
But wouldn't we want something like this to work, right? Like if I think through, like, you know, if I think through like an AKS use case, I would not be against having the ability to have an aggregated API server that didn't host and run on the cluster, right? Like I could point it at a cloud hosted instance. And that, like, if you get rid of the flag to go in the other way, I just would never be able to have an external name.
Right. It wasn't my go-to, right? So fixing this bug and leaving that option and having different capabilities where different resolution is possible makes sense to me. But when you have an aggregator routing that means aggregator determines the destination IP and it can't, then it doesn't make sense to support the option because it can't satisfy its requirement. So I guess what I'm saying is if you wish to configure that way, then that means enable aggregator routing equals false. And that option still exists. It's not urgent in my head to remove, but I'm just saying, like, if I were going to make consistent, I think that's the direction to make consistent. I'm willing to have different capabilities or different.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if I have a super strong opinion. I just was hoping that at some point in the future, I'd be able to run aggregated API servers that weren't on my cluster, but I don't necessarily have a specific need at the exact moment. Yeah, I think, yeah, so if you want to do a pass, David, then I think, let's see, I think Stefan's already looked at it, Jordan's already looked at it. I think you're the
Oh, okay. Stefan's looked at it. That's fine. He also reviewed and wrote half this.
I missed the beginning of the discussion. So it's about a flag I heard. It's not the fallback mechanism which was implemented a few days ago.
So my question was that so like I think the fallback approach is fine. I don't think there's any good need to like break people for things that work today. And so using the fallback to basically have two different ways of trying to do TLS, I think is fine. The question I had was, it is strange to me that an API service could work on one cluster and not another based on the flag setting of the API server. In particular, so it appears that the external name DNS resolution does not work if you have aggregator routing enabled. So it would mean in those environments, you could not have an aggregated API server that's not running on the cluster. Whereas in environments where that flag is not set, you could do that. And that, I don't know, it feels awkward.
That's strange. I agree.
And to me, it would be useful to be able to have an aggregated server that isn't on the cluster. But yeah, I don't know if we need to try to resolve that right now, but I think that's the question in my head.
Yeah, I think that would defeat the purpose of the aggregator routing to do that, because it would no longer be routing controlled by the aggregator.
Technically, the other alternative is that you just ignore the aggregator routing flag and just say it's always DNS resolution, which I'm sure people will get stressed about in different ways.
Yeah, that was one of the big advantages of aggregator routing.
I guess, could you have a third mode, which is try aggregator, but if it doesn't work, then use DNS? I'm not saying that makes any sense. I'm just trying to think through the.
So there were multiple benefits of having the aggregator actually determine where something goes, right? One of those is being sure of I'm going to exactly this spot. It eliminates a DNS dependency. It avoids some of the finer kube proxy or SDN style dependencies that exist. But I do believe that part of it was, and I would have to go look to be sure, but I believe part of it was tied up in this is how I determine which egress configuration to use, and that was based partly on where I was going. So, people who were using this for security would not be able to use that new option. People who weren't using it for security could just have used the other option to begin with. So, who would we be satisfying?
So there isn't a mode where we could try to satisfy both. So like you can support external names, but they can also be controlled, right? So you can imagine a relaxed environment where you can have external names and it can be whatever you want, but a constrained environment where you can still have external names, but they have to be like within some allowed list of the system.
I don't mind discussing that potential option, but I don't know that I see this PR as dependent upon that resolution, right? Like right now we have a mode, it allows external names, and those external names don't resolve TLS as expected.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah. I guess in my head I hadn't thought through how difficult it would be to get all the pieces lined up.
I don't think it's mechanically difficult in the code. I think reasoning through who would turn that on, does it satisfy the original needs of what we created this for? Or the fan out is bigger than the change.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so how do we move forward?
If Stefan has already reviewed it, I would be happy if Stefan would be willing to approve. If he hasn't already looked at it, then if I haven't looked at it by the end of the week, who was it? Was it Todd? Todd promised to ping me on Slack and remind me.
Okay. Did we answer all of Jordan's questions? I don't think Jordan is today here. Because that potentially is another action item, like, go back to Jordan and see if whatever we decide as the outcome is okay with.
Yeah, there might be one API question. I think he suggested also as an alternative to have a flag, an explicit flag, which switches on this new external name as a TLS name. And I'm not sure he has opinions whether this solution with the fallback or the other one is better. So there might be something you have to ask him.
I think in the Slack thread, he indicated that you would rather have the fallback than adding anything to the API.
Me too.
Okay. Can we move on to the next one? Todd, you know what you have to do?
Yep. I appreciate the help. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Okay, I think, Sunny, I saw you joining the call. We skipped you because you were going to be late, but if you want, we can go with you next.
Yeah, sounds good. So I think I'm just proxy for Calorie here. He cannot join. So basically, we added this quota support for a feature called volume attributes class. And then we got the feedback that we want to have a discussion of how likely to make the quota system not generic instead of right now. Different resources are hard-coded and added to the quota check.
Yeah, so I had asked the question. A while back, we added the ability to have generic counts. So you'd be able to say, I want to count how many of these things exist in a namespace, and I want to control it. Separately, we have the ability to describe a scope. So a scope today is currently an enumeration, and a scope describes what type of resource to select. So you can think of it almost like a field selector, where it is, I want to have this many of these things when this field is equal to terminating. And so my question in this PR is it better to approach this as having a count that has an attached scope versus having a different kind of, as I recall, it's a different shape in the resource name?
Like for scope, like what the issue is, like for volume attribute class, we are thinking about this is a cluster level resource. So if we want to add a scope, what type of scope you think we should add?
So there is, as I understand it, you're trying to quota persistent volume claims. The
Yes.
persistent volume claims have a class associated with them.
Yes, so it's volume attributes class.
Okay, so they have a volume attributes class. And so could I think of this as I have a generic count for persistent volume claims, and I want to allow 10 of these when the volume class is equal to gold. And I want to allow 6 of these when the volume class is equal to platinum or something like that. Thereby using like the generic count plus the scope to actually control the selection of the items.
But so what is a scope here? Because like, for example, for the volume attributes class gold, we only want to allow a maximum of 10 PVCs to be in this volume attributes class.
Sure. So a scope, I've gone ahead and linked in the chat. A scope is a way to say, I want to quota this many things. So I want to quota a count, but the count will only apply to pods that are terminating or pods that have a priority class equal to foo. And so when I look at this, it looks like a very similar problem. You want to quota PVCs, and you only want to quota them when the attribute class equals gold. And I think this is exactly what you want to do.
So you are saying we can use scope to restrict that only PVCs in the associated with a pod that's up and running.
Well, so not associated with a pod, right? But I bring it up as a way to say like pods have this one, and this effectively the idea of priority class effectively becomes a field selector that says only quota pods that have priority class foo, right? And what that allows us to do is have a more limited set of resource names, right? And say where they apply. And I think that would be more generally applicable, because when the next thing comes in, maybe you want to control how many ingresses of a particular type you can have. Like you can have an ingress with a class of foo, but you can have 3 of them, and an ingress of a class not foo, you can have 12, right? It looks like a very generic problem, and I think that is what scopes were intended to cover. And we just don't yet have a concept of generic scope. But if we were to add one here, we now have a pattern for adding it because we have the way to describe a field selector today.
And is this scope already supported that we just need to consume it, or it's something like it's
there would need to be a new type of scope added to the API.
A new type of scope, but the scope itself has the API support.
The concept of a scope exists. There is not currently one that is a type of field selector.
Okay. I mean, like this can be a use case, but we just need to take a look at the design again and like discuss about like if we want to add the scope.
Yeah, so like when I look at it though, like trying to add a new pattern of resource, that's the name of the thing that you're describing here, is I believe it's called a resource in the API. That doesn't look appropriate, right? I think the appropriate way to add it is to actually describe the scope that is needed and then reference the scope. And I think that'll age a lot better for us.
Okay.
I'm happy to, so Stefan, are you familiar with the quota system here?
I guess roughly.
Yeah. So yeah, does that make sense to you as well? Where we have something for, here's a count, we have a concept of a scope already. We just don't have a way to apply it to a generic field yet. And this would be a way to do that.
Yeah,
And also, like, do we have any estimation of, let's say we want to add a new scope and apply to the quota for VAC? In general, just estimation.
Estimation of what?
Like if we want to change, like currently we are not using the scope, and then like we need to add a new scope, how much work is that?
I don't think it's huge. It's not tiny, but you know, does it fit into a release? With motivation, probably, right? If you look at the actual resource here, you can see we already support different ways to select the items to include. And so selection at this level is not a foreign concept.
Okay, and I'm still trying to like understand for the scope of VAC, and you're suggesting that we scope it at the pod level?
So now here's perhaps where I don't know the name of the field that we're talking about here. What is the name of a field on the persistent volume claim that you're talking about?
VAC.
So looking at that exact resource, I have a persistent volume claim spec, and there is a volume attribute class name, which is located here.
Yes.
And so I would expect to see something like resource PVC and scope as field selected, and then scope selector thing as dot spec dot volume attributes class name equals. I would expect it to look probably something like that when you go to express it. And so that would be our existing generic count with a scope that is field selected, with the field selector being that.
And what scope, like what resource does the field selector apply to?
It applies to the resource that is being quoted.
So it's PVC.
Yes, if I understand it correctly, that line 563, that's the one you're trying to control, correct?
Yeah. We want to control how many like PVCs can consume the VAC.
Yeah. And so I think that's selecting the same thing, right? So it would allow you to select class names of gold and say that you could only have 5 of them.
Yes. But what does the scope do then? Like, why do we need a scope? Because the current implementation is also only checking like how many PVCs are using the VAC.
If I understand the current implementation, it achieves this by describing a new kind of resource name that does not consistently apply across all resources. So it is adding a one-off that will have to be duplicated for anyone else who wants to do this. And there are many other things with concepts like class name.
Oh, oh, class name. Okay. Yeah, I just don't understand like what does the scope do? So does this mean we don't need to like which step does the scope save us not to do?
It means that in every quota from now forever, the next ones that also want to quota based on a field or based on, say, a class name would be able to leverage the same pattern of I have a class name, I specify it by scope, and I have a count, and I want to count this type of object with this scope, with this field being set. And so does it do anything special or great for volume attribute classes or for PVCs? No. But does it do the right thing for the platform as we look and say, we have lots of resources that have classes that people might want to select on? I think that it does.
Okay, so basically this is a new way of doing, in our cases, per VAC resource control, but this is a new way that's suggested by the API machinery that's better for either performance or like
better for the ecosystem, right? It's better for extensibility as we look at this.
Okay, and then like I have another question. Like, does this mean like currently our storage class? I believe our storage quota is on the older system. Like, would this impact anything?
It would give a second way to describe it, but this wouldn't require a change there. So what's happened is since we developed storage classes, there have been a lot of improvements in, say, the CRD space that make this alternative more important and more practical to do.
Okay, so you're saying from now on, if anyone wants to add a quota for like this type of new resource or like VAC, you're suggesting everybody using the scope and scope selector.
Yes, for counts, right? I do see a difference between a count and something like capacity. And I know volume has things like capacity. Yeah.
Okay. Then like let's say if in the future because the VAC itself has a it's just a map of like volume properties. So it means like customers, like the end users can also specify different things in the volume attributes class, like for example, capacity or like provision IOPS, provisioned throughput. Like if that's the case, do you still suggest like for example, in the future, we might have like some quota restriction on IOPS and throughput. And then the VAC will stay in the scope and scope selector for the count. And then we may need something else to specify the total IOPS or total throughput for the volume. Would that be a problem?
So something trying to do a transitive lookup where the entity that you are quoting, in this case, the PVC, does not hold the value that you are going to quota for. So for instance, if there was indirection between the PVC and then a lookup to a volume class, and then the value from the volume class is used for the quota, I don't believe that is a quota pattern that we would be in favor of. The cost of that indirection and remaining up to date is both expensive and and the complexity that would add, I don't think would fit well with the controller that we have today.
Oh, okay. So like the suggestion here is like we still use the scope and scope selector for the current count use case.
For the current count use case, I think using the scope and the scope selector would work well. For a future use case where you wish to have indirection and quota on the indirection, I don't think that's what our quota system is designed to do, and I don't think I would suggest pursuing it.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Sounds good.
Thank you, David, for the class, almost. Sunny, did you get what you needed for the next, for being unblocked?
Yeah.
Very good. Thank
Okay.
you both. Okay, 11:38 in my clock. Let's continue with Abu.
Yes, thank you. So mine one should be quick. So this CAP basically tries to address two issues. The first one is NetHTTP did not provide any support for per request timeout until version 120. So the lack of read-write timeout can result in like blocked IO on the server. To address this, we added like a timeout filter in the handler chain. Basically, the filter executes the wrapped request handler asynchronously on a new Go routine, right? And it sends a 504 to the client if the inner Go routine does not finish within the allotted allocated context deadline. The timeout filter itself has been a source of like hard to debug data races so far because it's asynchronously executes the request handler. With version 120 of Go, NetHTTP like allows us to manipulate per request timeout, and this CAP basically is primarily tries to enable that feature for KubeAGregator server. So I have tried to list the risks and mitigations, also the importance of maintaining parity with the observability, and also like the level of testing we should have. The primary goal of this to enable this feature through like an alpha feature gate so that we can progress there. So yeah, I'm looking for like feedback, reviews, and if there is like any concerns, then would like to get to alpha this release. With that, I'll stop for any questions.
Bo's got a hand.
Oh yes, Mo, yes.
So I looked at the net HTTP handler not too long ago and our internal timeout handler when I did the HTTP2 fixes. Unless something has changed since the last time I looked at it, the standard library one was also just implemented as a new Go routine, right?
Yes, yes.
So what I want to make sure we don't make worse is this handler and this timeout logic that we have is really, really vulnerable to resource consumption in the cases of HTTP2, because you can just absolutely swarm it if you're careful with how you make the requests. And because there's no way to do preemption in Go, once you spawn that secondary Go routine, it's just going to leak resources until it gets reclaimed, right? And I remember when I was trying to poke around with it, the one that was in standard library was even worse at losing, like leaking resources than the one that we had. And it also doesn't do the like 504 stuff. So like I think that would be my main concern here. Is like already like kind of like a susceptible part of our system, and I don't want to make it even worse. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for HTTP2 at least, I think with this feature enabled, the timeout filter becomes redundant because NetSDP already spins up a go routine with the timer, and it'll directly send a stream reset error to the client. So that's, I think, a better option than having the timeout filter, because timeout filter is on our side and we have to deal with all the the concurrency issues.
I mean, well, that's not the part I'm concerned. I'm concerned about the resource consumption, right? Like at the end of the day, once Go has launched that Go routine, it does not matter if the stream gets canceled because the Go routine is running, right? There's even if the contexts that were passed into that secondary Go routine get canceled, nothing makes the work stop. Right?
Oh yes, I think they have solved that, because right now the handler, if you do a write on the response writer object or do a flush, they have added actually a flush error, which actually returns an error. So you will get an error, you will get a timeout error if you do write on a request that's if the write timeout has expired. The write method of the response writer object will return an error. So the handler has a chance to basically catch those errors and then panic, and then this gives the handler a way to return.
Right, I know, but none of our handlers do that. Right?
Well, that's the whole purpose of this CAP. And our handlers, we can wrap the response writer object in a way that once we see this error, we can raise a panic, and then the handler will terminate at that point.
Okay, so does so this CAP covers the whole "I'm going to panic" to?
Yes,
Okay.
I think so. Yeah. And I think the CAP covers this, and if not, I will add more details. I think the CAP has a section that tells you how we can basically make sure the handler terminates as soon as it sees the error.
Yeah. So this is amusing to me because I went down the same route of adding a bunch of panics to make the timeouts actually truly time out the launch Go routine. I guess my only advice there would be very careful, because I crashed the API server a bunch of times in the process.
Absolutely. And that's why I think we brought it up in the SIG meeting, and there's a CAP for it. And I'll also be backing up with the alpha feature gate.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There was just a few code paths that appeared to be guarded by the server panic, the HTTP server panic catching, that were not, and thus it would literally just crash the whole process. Yeah, I mean, yes, I'm glad this will be behind a feature gate. I don't know. I guess I'd look forward to the PRR on this, I guess.
Sure, yeah. There's a work in progress PR, but yes, I think there's more to do, and definitely, yeah.
I don't think the PRR is going to be noteworthy, Mo, right? Like, you think about what it would be doing, it would be saying, do we have a way to turn this off should it fail? But, making sure that every potential site of panic does not result in a process exit is not something that PRR has a way to check or enforce. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess that's fair. Yeah, so certainly we would give you a way to get out of it if you saw it, but yeah.
I think your observations on this would be really useful, Mo. I was primarily focused on, does the client behavior do what it's supposed to? And is the client behavior compatible? And it's not directly compatible. So I requested a bunch of tables be written up. They're all written up here.
Yes.
And I believe my only other hesitation was ensuring feature gatedness and observability that we had today that will be changed when this is enabled.
Yes, I added a section in the CAP that addresses the parity with the observability. So please take a look, and I think we can keep parity.
Yeah, but what I'm not sure of is whether Mo is very quietly trying to say that he believes the kube-API server timeout handler as currently written is better than the Golang one, And we should therefore not make this switch at all. And so, Mo, if you're trying to say that, I would encourage you to just come out and say that.
So when I did the HTTP2 stuff, which was a while ago now, it certainly looked like ours was better. But I have not kept up with standard library changes.
Yeah, I mean, if you're referring to the timeout handler that exists in the NetHTTP, what they have added in 120 is different from their version of the timeout handler.
Okay, so maybe they have improved it.
Yeah.
Well, I hope they have improved it.
It's an orthogonal feature in NetHTTP2. Basically, they're trying to they're basically setting the streams, the write and read streams, like adding a timeout for those, which is totally separate from the timeout handler implementation in NetHTTP.
I see. Okay, so I think we're talking about different things then. So
Yes.
Yeah. So then maybe this is all fine.
Yeah.
I will also tell you, Mo, I was not planning on reviewing the Golang implementation. I was willing to take it on assumption that the Golang implementation would be more reliable and better maintained over time than our own.
I don't necessarily have that much confidence, having been involved in the recent but
I can work with you offline, Mo, just to go through what has changed and what I'm trying to do, just to make sure that your concerns are kind of like, like they're kind of addressed.
Yeah, no, I mean, but yeah, what you've described sounds different than what I remember. So I think improvements have likely been made. And I like the general premise of not reinventing things that the standard library does. So.
Are we good? To move to the next one?
I think so.
Okay, thank you. I don't think we're going to make it in the next 11 minutes, so let's see how far we can get. Alex, you are next. We have Alex?
Yeah, I just wanted to introduce this new KEP to add variables to schemas for CEL. So yeah, basic idea is we've added CEL to CRDs a while ago. We added CEL for validated admission policies. And then in the beta for validating admission policy, we also added variables, but we didn't go back and add them to the CRD schemas. This is a feature that's been requested to improve the readability of the schemas, because there's a lot of duplicated expressions sometimes. You can also encode constants with variables, and it's also going to be extremely useful in my own efforts to annotate our native types in CEL. I have listed a couple of use cases in the KEPs for the declarative validation and for CRDs. But yeah, the basic idea would be to add a new Kubernetes extension. Yes, listed right there. Kubernetes validation variables that has a name and an expression, and you can refer to the variables by name in CEL expressions for any sub-schema of the schema that defines that. So what I'm looking for from the SIG today is just like agreement that this is something that we want to do, and maybe get some volunteers for reviewers.
So does it work similar to the way it works for validating admission policy, where there's a separate region where I describe my variables, and then they're stored in like variables dot, and I give it the name?
Yeah, exactly. One distinction is that we wouldn't be putting the variables list at the top level in the CRD definition. It would be going in line with the schema, which is maybe something to note. But it would work the same. You would define them side by side, give them names, and refer to them with variables dot the variable name.
And so there would be variables. Would variables on an individual element be reusable throughout the schema? So like if I if I had a variable on field foo, would I be able to use it on field bar?
Not if foo and bar are both siblings of the same object. So if you defined the variable on the object that owns both of those fields, they should be able to access it, but not their like siblings.
Okay. And then
Is it-
oh, go ahead, Stefan.
Is there any restriction on what you can have as expression? Do they have to normalize to a number or something like that? Or is it just like, are they put to the context and computed when the actual expressions, like the validations, are computed?
So the CEL supports type checking, so we'll be able to see what type your expression resolves to, and wherever it's used, be able to type check the usages. So you can put any expression, any type that a CEL expression can resolve to, you can use as a variable.
The overall idea. Oh, sorry, Stefan. Did you have a follow up?
No, I think this sounds fine.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's synthetic sugar, right? It's not really changing the system much. It's just making it easier to express certain things.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe it optimizes like the cost of those. If they happen to be used many times, it's cheaper to compute them in advance, right?
Mm-hmm.
In concept, it's a thing that I like. I think it's a thing that would be helpful. That's not quite the same as saying I have the review bandwidth to come and look at it and review it. Not prepared to say no yet either. Maybe we talk offline with Joe and Stefan and try to work it out. I'm not as familiar with the way this would embed in the schema as probably Stefan is.
Yeah,
I'm not worried about that part. And Joe, I think Joe is a canonical reviewer, right?
Okay.
Or is he an author as well here? I'm not sure.
No, he's not an author, but I've been speaking to Joe offline about it, and I think he's going to be a reviewer on this too.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm in favor of the idea. I like the idea. But I'm not an expert in the open API aspect where it gets embedded.
All right. So yeah, it sounds like I can lean on Stefan and Joe as reviewers.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, maybe we can squeeze this last one if we have, well, we have Stefan. I don't know, Alvaro.
Yeah, that one is quick. Alvaro isn't here. It's just a pitch, and please take a look if you have interest in that. So he proposed to make the workqueue package generic, and there was a Slack discussion in our SIG channel with Jordan, me, and some other people about naming. Of course, we don't want to break anybody, so we don't want to reuse the names we have. So the idea is to have a prefix typed something. And the something is the old type that everybody uses in the ecosystem. But we would add that as a generic case. Maybe here's an example of Jordan. If you scroll back, you just saw it. Yeah, exactly. So this is basically the idea that we can, like this example there, the code, this one, yeah. And this might be, I mean, if we like that, I mean, in the last PR, there is no change in our controllers. So this is pretty compatible with existing code, which is good. And this might become a pattern if we want more of that. So this typed something. Yeah, take a look, leave your comments.
Very good. Thank you, Stefan.
Stefan, quick question. So I know this one was for workqueues. Have you tried experimenting all the way up to like the clients? Like, I vaguely remember...
Oh, this is a much bigger topic and a different topic, I think. Clients need a different design, basically. This is really for the drop-in where we have interfaces like generic any interfaces today, and we want to make it a bit more code type safe.
Okay.
It's not the topic about client code. It's much bigger.
I did have one question about the comment from Jordan and the way it went back and forth here. Was Jordan's comment essentially equivalent to there are certain APIs that I never want to change? Or is there space to...
It's about the first PR iteration, just replace existing types with a generic version.
Yeah, but so like I look at that and
again.
say, I would like that. Like that seems like the natural thing to do. And is there a cost to it? Yes, but why have two things forever?
It disrupts the ecosystem. If there's a good reason that we want to fix something, I can see the argument. But in those cases here, I don't think there's value in fixing anything.
But it does add up to there are certain Golang types you just don't want to change because it's too much work.
Yeah, and we want to avoid disruption, like people rebendoing, like the context topic we had some years ago, right? We did that intentionally, and this was not nice for many people.
Yeah. Okay.
Why couldn't we do something similar that we did last time, but in the opposite? So we kept the old clients at a different path, and then we made the new client, the in-place change with context. Why couldn't we make just like a V2, have all the type stuff in there, and just tell people, all right, in 1 year, we're going to delete the V1 folder. So
we could do that.
To me, that's
but it's messy. It's messy as well. I mean, both approaches work. It's a matter of taste, probably.
So the core change I have no issue with. I just don't really like the idea of we grow cruft forever, because it's
in this case, I don't see it as cruft. I think the instantiation of the generic type with the parameter any is something that I've seen and authored controllers would still want to use, because not every controller has just one type of object in the work queue. So in my view, it's not cruft. It's something that will have retained continuing value.
Okay, that's a good point.
Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it up here. We've been through a lot today. Thank you for all the energy and the patience. We will move the topics to next meeting. Of course, if there are urgent things, we don't have to wait 2 weeks. There are multiple channels to contact people. And yeah, I will upload the recording later today. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you hopefully soon.
Yeah.